Now, the rest of the story. Leonard Sly just stood there, his mouth falling open slowly as though some long-forgotten sight were materializing before his eyes. Well, in fact, one was. It was a vision of home. Leonard was born right there in that red brick tenement building, although he could not really have remembered it, could he? He was so young when the folks picked up and moved from Cincinnati to the house in the Ohio countryside. Maybe Leonard had just been told about the old place so many times that he felt he knew it. Anyway, there he stood, gazing up at the red brick building at 412 2nd Street in Cincinnati, even though the building itself had been gone for more years than anybody could remember. In fact, the entire 400 block of 2nd Street was gone. Victim of the urban planners who believed that plot of real estate would look better as what it now was, Riverfront Stadium, the new home of the Cincinnati Reds baseball team. For Leonard Sly was envisioning the scene as it was in the days of his birth, November 5, 1912. He was picturing the old tenement house at 412 2nd Street. From surrounding landmarks, he could tell exactly where the building had been. Leonard elbowed the ballpark spectator next to him. You see, over there, he said, that's where I was born. The other fellow arched an eyebrow. That's second base, mister, he answered. That's right. That's precisely where it was, where second base is right now. And more memories flooded forth. There's old Andy Sly, Leonard's dad, works down at the United States Shoe Company, 412 2nd Street. That was near the plant, so the family sank roots there. But the roots never took hold. The shoe company job proved impossibly dreary for a man like Andy, a fellow with adventure inside him, clawing to get out. So the next house was a houseboat on the Ohio River, 3 rooms, 12 foot by 50. The boat had a sail made from a half dozen of Matty Sly's best bed sheets. First day out, a storm ripped the makeshift sail to shreds. Let me interrupt Leonard's reverie right here, because I want you to hear what happened 2 weeks later. Somebody overheard, and somebody remembered what Leonard had said about his birthplace being out there on the riverfront field at second base. Well, you know what the Reds organization did. They sent Leonard second base, the bag itself. And that's all that's left of the early past of Leonard Sly. The far point on a dusty diamond in Cincinnati, where grown men play a kid's game. But I thought you'd like to see it for yourself, along with Leonard, across the decades and through misty eyes. Not a bad thing to show your grandchildren, Leonard said over 30 years ago, after visiting Riverfront Stadium. That is where Grandpa was born. Not, as one might imagine, on a cattle ranch somewhere in the American Southwest, but in an urban tenement transformed into a big league field of dreams. Oh, yes, you know Leonard Sly, the baseball fan for whom second base was home. You know him as cowboy singer-actor Roy Rogers. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. Roy Rogers was such a positive role model. You know, we don't have many positive role models in our modern society that could compare with Roy Rogers. He was the king of cowboys. That was his nickname. Generations of children, including my dad, played cowboys and Indians growing up. The cowboy and the Indians that they emulated was always Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Franklin Sly on November the 5th, 1911, in a tenement building on 2nd Street in Cincinnati, Ohio. Mr. Harvey said he was born in 1912, but other records indicate that he was born in 1911. Confusion about his birth year even appeared on his World War II draft card. Take a look at this. You can see that it showed his birth year as being 1912, but someone corrected it to read 1911. His age at the time was originally written as 28-29. That was scribbled out and 28 written beside it. I wonder if Lynn, that's what his family and friends called him, I wonder if Lynn knew his correct birth year. Well, eventually, that tenement building where Lynn was born was torn down and the Riverfront Stadium was built on the location. This is why Lynn said he was born at second base, as Mr. Harvey explained. Within months of Lynn's birth, Lynn's father, Andy, and his brother, Will, tired of their jobs and built a houseboat from salvaged lumber. In July 1912, Andy, his wife Maddie, and their 3 children, Mary, Cleta, and Lynn, along with Will, his wife Elizabeth, and their son Raymond, sailed east along the Ohio River from Cincinnati toward Portsmouth in the homemade 12-foot by 50-foot houseboat. The Sly families jointly purchased land near Portsmouth where they planned to disassemble the houseboat and build a house from the lumber. But Mother Nature altered their plans to their benefit. On March 23rd, a heavy rain began to fall, which continued for at least 4 days. Flooding from the rain killed an estimated 650 people in at least 13 states. Damages to property exceeded $330 million. This has become known as the Great Flood of 1913. The majority of the deaths, somewhere between 422 and 470, happened in Ohio. In Dayton, Ohio, downtown streets were covered with water 10 feet deep. 14 square miles of the city flooded. An estimated 123 people were killed in Dayton alone. In Hamilton, 35 miles downstream from Dayton, about 100 people were killed when water from 10 to 18 feet deep flowed through its residential districts. 93 people died from flooding in Columbus, Ohio. As the waters rose near Portsmouth, the Sly families used the high water to their advantage and moved their houseboat onto the water which covered their property. They carefully positioned the houseboat and tied it off. As the water slowly receded, they placed the foundation piers under the houseboat. The houseboat eventually rested perfectly on their land. Now there was another benefit in keeping the houseboat riverworthy. If the river flooded again, their home would be protected from the water because, well, it would float. In 1915, Lynn's sister Kathleen was born in the former houseboat. 4 years later, 1919, Andy purchased farmland near Lucasville, Ohio, well, about 12 miles north of Portsmouth, where he built a 6-room house. Despite his best efforts, Andy was unable to earn enough income from the farm for his family to survive. He took a job at a shoe factory in Portsmouth. During the work week, Andy stayed in Portsmouth. On weekends, he returned to the farm. While Andy was away, the rest of the family was pretty much isolated from the outside world. To communicate over long distances on the farm, Lynn and his mother devised different yodels. The varying pitch of their voices carried much farther than yelling. That yodeling was a skill that helped Lynn in the entertainment industry. In the days before electronic devices, television, even radio, the Sly family found ways to entertain themselves. Saturday night square dances were common on the Sly family farm. Lynn would often play the mandolin and call the square dances or sing. This began before Lynn was a teenager. By the time he turned 18, Lynn's musical abilities were more like a finely tuned machine. In 1929, Andy, Maddie, Lynn, and Kathleen drove in their 1923 Dodge to Lawndale, California to visit Lynn's older sister Mary and her husband. In the spring of 1930, the Sly family moved there permanently. Soon thereafter, Mary suggested that Lynn audition for a radio show called The Midnight Frolic. Producers of the show were surprised by Lynn's talents. A few nights later, Lynn, dressed in his best Western attire, played guitar, sang, and yodeled on the program. Keep in mind that he was dressed in his best Western attire to appear on radio. Lynn was in demand from then on. He joined several Western musical groups and formed a few of them. The most successful was the Pioneers Trio, which became the Sons of the Pioneers when a radio station announcer changed their name because he thought they were too young to be seen as pioneers. In 1934, the Sons of the Pioneers signed a recording contract and began recording material in August of that year. One of the songs to come out of that session was the Western standard Tumbling Tumbleweeds. I'll leave a link to that version in the description. Their 1934 recording was selected by the Library of Congress as a 2010 addition to the National Recording Registry, which selects recordings annually that are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The song fit the bill perfectly. Another hit the Sons of the Pioneers recorded was the classic Cool Water. I'll also leave a link for it in the description. In 1935, Lynn began working in Western films using his real name, Leonard Sly. Gene Autry was the king of Western films at the time, but he kept demanding more money for his work as the singing cowboy. Studios began looking for another singing cowboy that they could get for less money. Lynn fit the part perfectly. Well, almost. Republic Pictures, who hired Lynn, thought Leonard Sly was not really a suitable name for a Western star. The film company finally settled on a stage name for Lynn. They thought Roy had a good Western ring to it. At the time, Will Rogers was a popular Western comic entertainer, and they wanted to take advantage of that name recognition. From that point on, the world knew Leonard Lynn Sly as Roy Rogers. As Roy Rogers, Lynn became the king of cowboys. But Lynn, or Roy, was smart. He included a clause in his contract with Republic Pictures that he retained the right to his likeness, voice, and name for merchandising. Roy Rogers merchandise was wildly popular. There were action figures, books, play sets, a comic strip, watches, leather goods, flashlights, pocket knives, cap guns, pinball machines, and a host of other items. If it could be marketed with Roy Rogers' likeness or name, it was. At its height, Roy Rogers merchandise was second only to Walt Disney in the number of merchandise items featuring his name. And these items are highly collectible today. Roy Rogers was more than just a singing cowboy. His persona was one that taught lessons in fairness and gentleness. He was always on the right side of the law and respected the law. His was a positive character with unwavering principles. This was more than just Roy Rogers, the Hollywood-created persona. This was Leonard Lynn Sly, a positive role model. It seems that in our modern era, we need more positive role models like Lynn Sly. Don't you think? Now I want to say a special thank you to Philo Close, Cindy S., Bite Me, and Snoopy Connolly. If you enjoy broadcasts such as this and you want to help this channel to improve, please consider joining. I'll leave a link to join in the description below. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.